Hello everybody, and welcome back to OMB Reviews. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hope we're doing well, and today we'll be talking a little bit about a box office long-range forecast and also what the current box office tracking for the second weekend of Dune is looking like, as we now have Friday numbers, which I would say probably indicate a bit of trouble domestically for this film, especially based on some of the estimates that were coming out, at least from the likes of people over at Box Office Pro. Before going any further, though, please make sure you smash that like button, light up that fire button if you're watching over on Odyssey, and also make sure you're subscribed to the channel with that bell notification on. That way you know every time a new video or live stream goes live on the channel. And also smash that Rumble button, because I'm also uploading these to Rumble now, because, hey, why not? Anyway, as you can see, and this is something that I mentioned in a previous video, we still don't have any official reporting yet for the first Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday of the release of Dune, which of course had an HBO Max day and date release model going on for it. And obviously this is something that is going to be worth looking at in the future. I will say that some people have mentioned that this has been what basically what Warner Brothers and HBO Max has been doing with all of their day-and-date movies, that they have not been doing their daily box office numbers because of things being impacted by the box office as such. And the only issue that I find with that is that it does make things a bit let's just say a bit problematic to be able to actually follow anything. In fact, it's interesting how even films like The Suicide Squad really don't have any real daily breakdowns, which is a kind of an interesting thing to see. In fact, I'm kind of interested to see if that's actually the case, or if that's just an issue going on with the site right now. But it is still something worth mentioning, because obviously that means that we don't have any actual numbers to compare the day-and-date numbers for. But some things that I think we can talk about at the very least are these new updated figures for films like The Eternals, and also we finally have numbers for Ghostbusters Afterlife. So Ghostbusters Afterlife, I know, is a film that many people who subscribe to this channel are looking forward to. I think the trailer has definitely piqued my interest. It actually looks like it will be a worthy continuation of the story. Though, of course, I still hold to my own thoughts that I'm just tired of Hollywood continuing to just remake and reboot and restart all of these different franchises instead of making new stories for new generations and for new peoples, and, you know, showing that they still have the creative chops, because I just honestly don't think they really do have the creative chops in many of these spaces in Hollywood, because so many, especially of these producers, have really been so focused on, instead of telling good stories, have been instead focused on trying to tell certain narratives and push for certain narratives and push for certain politicking in their films. And it really has, I think, been a big, very clear indication that this has been the direction that they have been going in. But with Ghostbusters Afterlife, it is expected domestically to open up to $45 to $65 million in its opening weekend domestically, which, hey, is actually right on par with what Dune did. Dune opened to around $41 million. Ghostbusters Afterlife, coming from Sony Pictures Columbia, I believe this is going to be a theatrically exclusive film. The long-range total domestic for the film is around $130 to $190 million. And so when we look to that, we then, of course, have to understand this within the context of the budget, which, according to at least Wikipedia, which is normally a pretty good indication of whether or not a budget has been. They usually update these pretty well to be able to talk about what the actual budgets are for films whenever they get reported in any of the major news media sites. And so there is no actual budget yet for this film. I would assume, based on the CGI and based on the various effects in the film, that it'll be around $100 million or so, at least. That just seems to kind of be the indication. Maybe 85 to 125 million, somewhere in that range would make a little bit of sense for me. So $130 to $190 million domestically would be a decent showing for these pandemic times. And obviously it's going to very much kind of shift our focus into, one, if it overperforms in the domestic market, and two, how well or how not well it does in the foreign marketplace. Because obviously one of the places that this movie is not going to be able to get a lot of attention would be a place like China, because China is, of course, not just a bunch of communists, but also in their censorship board, they do not allow for films that indicate spirituality, indicates spirit presence, this kind of stuff, which is why horror films typically don't get released there, and also why a film like this likely will not be able to get released there either, would be my guess. So Ghostbusters Afterlife is going to rely on a lot of the other foreign markets to really kind of pick up the slack, because as we all know, any film that is a major box office success is typically reliant upon China. This is not always the case. Obviously, we look to films like Joker, for instance, which made well over $1 billion on incredibly low budgets, and that was all without China. So Ghostbusters Afterlife is definitely not screwed over here. We'll have to wait and see what the actual numbers are. Again, I cannot wait for it to come out November 19th, and of course, what its week 1 to week 2 drop-off is going to look like. One film, though, that is definitely looking a little bit let's say concerning for Disney, not just because the the critics score is incredibly low. In fact, officially, it is the first rotten film, I believe it's the first rotten film on Rotten Tomatoes ever in the history of the MCU. We'll see, of course, if that holds over and, what kind of spin comes out from, all the people at Disney. Obviously, there was the red carpet premiere, and the big focus, of course, was everyone talking about how diverse the film was, diversity, and yet the critics, who you would think would love that kind of thing, apparently found the film rather boring and found the film not really that interesting, and the characters not really that interesting. And yeah, I guess when you're bringing in 10 new characters and trying to give them a backstory all in one film, it is a bit of a thing to, it's a pretty big thing to try and chew off. And to be honest, I probably wouldn't be putting any of the blame in Chloe Zhao's camp, because she's probably trying to make a good film and is probably fighting with producers and fighting with all of these, major studio heads who are trying to push for certain Marvel-esque elements to be in the movie. And so it'll be interesting to see if Chloe Zhao is fully supportive of this project, or if, like some other directors who have worked with major studios before, maybe after the fact or a couple of years after the fact, kind of distance themselves saying, yeah, it was not a very good experience. But of course, that's speculation on my part. We'll have to wait, of course, see if anything happens. But the box office has dropped 12% in their projections. So obviously, some of the negative impressions coming from critics has impacted what many of these prognosticators have been putting forward. So now it's expected to make $67 to $92 million domestically in its opening weekend, which of course would be just around in line with where a film like Shang-Chi was able to make some money. Of course, the difference is that this film, The Eternals, cost at least another $50 million more than Shang-Chi did, and also Shang-Chi did incredibly well domestically in comparison to a lot of other films that come out during the pandemic, making over $200 million domestically. This right now is expected to make somewhere between $165 and $215 million domestically, so again, that average would put it maybe right up around $200 million. This is a film that, if that is indeed the case, if it only makes $200 million domestically, which would be, again, I think impressive for a film like this during this time period, it would then need to make $300 million at least internationally to break even. And there is a lot of questions as to whether it will get a China release, whether the China release date will stick, all those kinds of things. And this is why I think we're seeing such massive drop-offs in the projections for this film. So will it get to the $500 million it needs to break even? Again, we have to wait for the actual numbers to come out to really be able to really say one way or the other. But it's not looking good, at least based on these early projections. Keep in mind that a lot of these projections have been incredibly off, right? They very much lowballed films like Venom 2, which did incredibly well, and they also overprojected for films like No Time to Die, which very much underperformed in a lot of different ways. And so this is something where this is definitely not the end-all be-all, but I would say that at least in the grand scheme of things, and at least in the story leading up to it, it's not good to have negative reactions from almost all of the critics, to have, of course, a lot of fans looking especially at this red carpet premiere and seeing, oh, this is what the film's about. Oh, you're pushing ideology. Oh, yeah, no, thank you. So if you don't have the critics on your side and you don't have certain audiences on your side, it kind of leaves you the question, who is this movie really made for, and who is actually going to see this movie and give it any money? And again, we don't really have an answer to that question as of yet, because as we learned from films like Solo: A Star Wars Story, pre-sales are only part of the story. It's about the people that show up on the day to go buy it from the box office, as that is a number that is typically hard to predict, especially right now with everything going on with the actual pandemic times. I did mention earlier, though, that I would talk a little bit about what was going on for the second weekend of Dune. So obviously Dune is opening up in its second week of release. And let me just make sure that I have the correct number. This is from last weekend, what it made there. So I will then have to pull up the tracking here. So again, that was long range forecast. So the weekend, of course, With only films like Last Night in Soho, which is a film I'm personally interested in, and films like Antlers, which I've heard from a subscriber is actually, not terrible. It's kind of one of those horror films which I typically stay away from, though, so probably not going to be one that I try and see or go out of my way to see. Last Night in Soho is a film, again, just the trailer intrigues me enough, and the two lead actresses they have in the film look fantastic. I think that it's again, I think the performances that they're going to give just look great. But as you can see here, the opening weekend for Antlers, 3 to 6 million. 5 to 10 million for Last Night in Soho for, again, lower budget film. Again, that's not terrible, but it's also not great either. Again, coming from Focus Features there. But Dune is expected to make $18.4 million in its second weekend with only a 55% drop. The reason why this is an issue is because, as I said, we now have the Friday numbers, and the Friday number for Dune is a 71% drop. Now, this is not the end-all be-all, because obviously it could make up some of the money it needs to make to reach that 55% drop that they are projecting on today and tomorrow. That is totally possible. The issue, of course, is that this is still fighting against itself with the HBO Max release. Now, it has to be said, this is a film that, even though financially it may not break even, it may not make its money back, it is still greenlit for a sequel, and that sequel will be theatrically exclusive, and so many are expecting, or at least hoping, that it'll do a lot better when that second film comes out in 2023, in October 2023, which is currently when they have that film pegged to come out. Now, will they hold to that date? Will we see any changes? Obviously, it's hard really to tell at this point because things have just been in a state of flux for so very long, but it is still, I think, something worth noting and worth talking about, because there have been some people who have just not understood that talking about the box office numbers and the box office profitability of a movie does not, one, indicate my own feelings towards said movie, or indicate that I'm cheering for or against certain films either. When it comes to the actual numbers, the numbers are what they are. As you can see, $5 million, that is what has been given to us as far as the Friday. Now, normally the Friday is going to be a bit higher as far as drop-off goes, because normally it's not, obviously with the opening weekend, they have a Thursday opening night premiere, which again, a lot of people tend to go to, and the Friday numbers added together, so it's usually going to be higher for that reason alone, which is why that drop-off is much more significant. So what's going to be more interesting is going to be tomorrow, when I do the official box office breakdown, both here and, of course, also a smaller, more defined breakdown for the Geeks and Gamers channel, specifically on Dune's second weekend drop-off, whether or not it's going to be more in the 60s or actually get to 55. But I will say it's got to do it pretty well at this point. It's going to, again, not got to make another $13 million. So it's got to make $7 million today and tomorrow, or some mixture of that. So again, definitely a possibility for it to do that. Usually it makes more on a Saturday than on a Sunday. But being on HBO Max means that, especially with currently where I am, there's still a lot of rain in certain parts of the world. And again, people are still afraid, and the fear mongering is still very real. Again, it's going to be hard, I think, to convince people who have HBO Max to leave their houses, even though this film is doing incredibly well, especially in large format screens, obviously, because this is a film that is made to be seen on a large format screen. And I'm planning to go see it this weekend, this coming week on Wednesday is right now when I have a scheduled ticket to go see it, because right now I've only ever seen it on HBO Max, and even though I personally like the film, I think there's issues with the storytelling. However, a lot of that is being impacted by the things that are missing from the story, which obviously any person who's ever read a story and then seen an adaptation always has complaints because of that very reason. It's hard to stay objective in that. I do think there are certain story elements that can be confusing for a lot of people that don't have any of the backstory, though I, of course, have heard different opinions on that too from people like, as I mentioned previously, my little brother, who really loved it and wants to dive further into the story overall. So Dune, right now, as I mentioned this on Friday Night Lights last night, if it ends up around $300 million after the end of this weekend with the international and domestic numbers, I think that this film is very much in trouble, because it needs to make well over $400 million to break even. So if it only gets to $300 million by the end of this weekend, it's in trouble. If it gets close to or surpasses $350 million, I would say it's going to be in a much better position to potentially make its money back over time. The reason why I say that is because once you have films like Eternals coming out and Ghostbusters Afterlife, this film is going to have a lot of competition at the box office, and it's still going to be available on HBO Max. And those HBO Max numbers are really going to bite into the potential box office profits and the potential box office numbers that this film potentially could have had if it was not in this day and date model. Obviously, Warner Brothers committed to the HBO Max day and date release model because obviously when they first started that, the theaters really weren't producing all that much. Now several films have come out, and there have have been audiences that have been brought back by certain films, and we've seen some films with large budgets still fail, and films with a little bit more manageable budgets succeed, make some profits. So again, we'll have to wait and see on Dune. But what are your thoughts about this? Do you think that Dune is going to make a killing this weekend, make over $350 million? Do you think it's going to get to the point of profitability at some point? Again, it's been out in so many markets internationally for so long right now, and it only made so much last weekend in the new markets it came out in. There really isn't a lot of room for this film left. And so we'll have to, again, wait and see what those Sunday numbers are going to look like. Also, what are your thoughts about the long-term implications for films like Ghostbusters Afterlife and the updated numbers for the movie Eternals? Do you think Eternals is going to be a massive box office flop? I think with projections like this, if they hold or if they fall somewhere in the middle or underperform, very much could be a huge sign of disappointment. Could be the biggest box office bomb in the MCU history, especially it's the lowest reviewed in MCU history at this point in time, at least from the critics' perspective, and obviously critics don't matter. And then the Ghostbusters Afterlife, do you think that Ghostbusters Afterlife will be able to overperform and even make some money? Let me know your thoughts about that also in the comments section below. If you like this video, smash that like button, smash the rumble button, also light up that fire button over on Odyssey. You're all amazing, beautiful people. I'll be back on the channel in a couple hours for my Chosen of Valhalla live stream for October, as tomorrow is Halloween, and so we're pushing it to Saturday, and I will try my best to do a live stream tonight, the Welcome to Asgard podcast live stream tonight at 7 p.m. Eastern. We'll see, and I'll let you know, of course, if I decide to cancel, because Chosen streams typically go for about 3 hours, and obviously I need to spend time with family and voice rest. Anyway, you guys are all amazing, beautiful people. Hope we all have a wonderful rest of your day. A huge shout out to Bifford the Hobbit, Caratharp, and also to JC, who are members on Locals and on Patreon, respectively. You're great. Have a wonderful day, everybody. And as always, God bless. And now for a huge shout out to all of my Patreon, Subscribe Star, and Locals members. Andrew Hoyle, Animation Commentator. Brandon, Brian P., Christopher Bowman, Don Bruno de la Mancha, Father Christopher Miller, hail to you, Father. Father Damian Cook, Garrett Searles, Harold Francis, Inflamed Wood, Jacob Juice, Jeffrey Toone, Joe Horn, Jonathan Carney, Gomer Kyle, 79, Laura, the Modern Major General's Story, Mike Jackson, Dion, Mad Mitch Dunaway, Mondo Spieler, Mr. Peabody, On to June, Orange Hat Reviews, Out of Step with Reality, Priscilla Hall, Rosetta Allen, Stan Andrian, Teresa Martin, Theodore Benden, Tina Bojan, and Tina B., the Empress of the Universe. Thank you for being my Patreon members, and a huge shout out to my Subscribe Star members, The R, Fast Reaction, Nosferatu Gatsu, John B., Perpetual Punster, Mr. Roy, Glinzer, J. Alex McCarthy Jr., Dean Heiss Slash, the new number 2, J-Rod, the Beer Guru, and ZK-Man. Thank you very much for supporting me over on Subscribestar. And to my one Locals member, Robert Barnes, thank you for supporting me over on Locals. And if you want a name shouted out, or your name rather, shouted out at the end of every single live stream and video, please consider joining on one of those platforms, either Patreon, Subscribestar, or Locals. Links to that can be found in the description. Look at that top link especially. It's called the Willow link there. It'll give you links to all the social media platforms and also ways to support the channel. If you want to be an Army of Asgard level or above member, you can get access to giveaways that I do every single month. I give away 4Ks, Blu-rays, all kinds of stuff. It is a lot of fun. Also, if you join at the Keeper of the Bifrost level, you get access to all of that. Plus, you get access to an exclusive podcast that I do with John the Flick Pick Flickinger. We have a lot of fun. We do that once or twice a month. And if you join at the Chosen of Valhalla level, you get all of that. Plus, in your first month, you get a t-shirt of your choice and send anywhere in the world. And also, you get to be featured on the channel once a month on the Chosen of Valhalla live stream, where we get to hang out and have a good time. So anyway, if any of that sounds good, check out that link in the top of the video as I mentioned. You guys are amazing and beautiful people. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, God bless.